and I realize I've lost a lot of my South African accent that I sound.
It's been our biggest effort in business. When I used to call people, they listened because they couldn't, they had to.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't.
I agree. No, you didn't.
No, they didn't.
What was your maiden name?
A lot did.
What was your maiden name again?
Horn. H-O-R-N.
I remember the
But
name.
I knew the Lotshoffs from Vicksburg and all of that. You know, there were a whole lot of the phrase starters who were Genesi.
Wow. Rabbi Enfel, I can just tell you, this is rural Judaism at its most amazing, at its best, at its worst, at its best. You know,
we try our best.
It's
already 7:02.
Okay.
So I want to welcome everyone. And again, I want to encourage everyone to keep your video on unless you're in the middle of dinner. So that way everyone can be part of the community and we can see each other. And it is my pleasure to welcome our speaker tonight, Alan Molk, who's a doctor, an ER doctor by training, and has also written a book and is also expert in the issues of dying and dying with dignity. And as often when talking about any particular subject, it's easy for me to refer to this book or a book written by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And this particular book is a collection of some of his best essays entitled The Insecurity of Freedom, Essays on Human Existence. And in 1964, Rabbi Abraham, Dr. Heschel, was asked to speak to the American Medical Association. And which of course, it seems interesting that a rabbi, a philosopher, a freedom rider would be asked in 1964 to address the American Medical Association. But what was Dr. Heschel's address? It was entitled "The Patient as a Person." And so I'm just going to give you a couple of lines from Rabbi Heschel, who says the following: "The doctor enters a covenant with the patient. He penetrates the patient's life, affecting the mode of living and often deciding the fate. The doctor's role is one of royal authority, while the patient's mood is often one of anxiety and helplessness. The patient is literally a sufferer, while the doctor is the incarnation of the patient's hope. The patient must not be defined as a client who contracts with a physician for service. The patient is a human being entrusted to the care of the physician. The physician is the trustee holding the health in trust." And it goes on. In fact, one of our members who's actually with us tonight, when her son got into medical school, before he started medical school, we sat down and studied this speech together that Heschel actually gave in 1964, just 6 years before he passed away at the age of 65. And so I want to tonight is, we often think about I think that that Rabbi Abraham Dr. Heschel was referring to the healing process in terms of the way the doctor interacts with the patient and seeing the patient not as an object, but as a human being. And it is, I would say, kal v'chomer, all the more important at the end of life for one to see the patient as a human being in its entirety, of the concept that holistically the the doctor must engage with the patient as a human and not as something to be studied, not as an object, but that truly is the nature of the relationship that makes the potentially, hopefully, the relationship between the doctor and the patient a holy one. So with that, I'd like to turn us over to the real experts. I'm just a GP rabbi, to Alan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Enfeld, and thank you also, Diane Friedman, for making this evening possible and for inviting me to speak to your amazing congregation in Vancouver, where it is right now, I believe, about 72 degrees. Here in Phoenix, it's 106, about a 33-degree difference, but it's a dry heat. Good evening, Erev Tov to everyone, and to my South African connections, how's it? You'll know what I mean by that. That's the Jewish South African greeting. To the other Native Canadians present tonight, glad you're here, and glad you're not out and about in your boat, hey? That you're actually physically present here tonight. Thank you for joining. And I also am delighted to see my co-author and cousin, Dr. Robert Shapiro, at the bottom of your screen. He's joining us too. I'll be doing the presentation, but he'll be available for questions and answers at the very end. Furthermore, Bob and I, we normally would have the Shapiro Molk comedy hour, but tonight it's a slightly more serious topic. So without further ado, we're going to start the presentation, and I hope that you find it meaningful and educational. I'll go to share screen.
Just one thing before we continue on. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat box, and then I will help pass them on after the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, can everybody see the first slide? I see a thumbs up from Diane. Thank you. Okay, so here we are on August 25th for Congregation Beth Israel in Vancouver. And the presentation is in part about the book that Bob Shapiro and I co-authored, but it's also meant to be very much to be educational and to do some enlightenment. This is your shul, I believe. Beautiful building. A little introduction about myself. That really isn't me. That is more or less what I looked like about 34 years ago, sitting in the resuscitation area, awaiting for a heart attack victim or an overdose patient to show up by ambulance. I am not, however, your average ER doctor. I am the father of triplets. Asher, Ariel, and Eliza, there they are as infants, and to the right, me taking them to a Costco in Tucson where they all attended the U of A, providing them with the necessary stuff they needed, leaving with my wallet significantly lighter. Only Eliza's marriage. This is a picture of the chuppah in San Diego, in La Jolla. And to the right, you see my lovely, amazing wife, the lawyer Laura. With her, I have learned the art of negotiation and compromise, and I consider myself, if you're married to a lawyer, a self-proclaimed expert on the topic of compromise and negotiating. I'm also a big baseball fan. I love the Boston Red Sox. I spent my first year in this country in Massachusetts. Don't have too much love for the New York Yankees. That's me someplace in New York City giving the Yankees the thumbs down. I'm also somewhat of a, shall we say, a bit of a Meshuggah, as some people would like to refer to. And I'm also an accordion player and always work over Christmas, playing Christmas carols for the all my Gentile colleagues, nurses, patients, and their families, and that always goes down very well. Yes, I am a jokester. I love to laugh. I believe in humor. Humor is so important for us. And yes, I am somewhat of a Meshuggah goofball. I've always been viewed as the eternal optimist, jokester, I was the class clown in medical school. I always like cheering people up. And those who know me still to this day cannot believe that I co-authored a book that covers this important, serious topic. So what prompted me to do this? This picture pretty much tells it all. I sometimes get blindsided with a little sadness when I see this. Just give me a second to regather myself. My beloved mother, Serona Molk, who had Alzheimer's, and I initially started writing this book when she was still alive as a catharsis in order to deal with my own grief and her deteriorating condition. My mother was the most harmless person I ever knew. She was my role model. It was never about her. She was so altruistic. And she never, ever would have wanted to be a burden on her family. Yet this nightmare became a reality. A quick reminder, anyone who disagrees, please raise your hand. I don't think there'll be anyone disagreeing. Life as we know it on earth has a beginning, a middle, and an end. On the top, you see a breast. In the center, you see a hossen stepping on the glass. And in the end, we see someone being laid to rest. No arguments, right? Okay. Many of us as physicians still look at death as the ultimate enemy. And I'm going to emphasize this during the talk. But to many patients and their loved ones, death comes as a friend. After a lingering illness accompanied by suffering, death often comes as a huge relief to the surviving loved ones. I will never forget driving back from my mother's funeral, sitting next to my brother Ian in the car. He's a cardiologist back east. And I looked at him and I said to him, is it only me, or do you feel an enormous sense of relief? He looked at me and said, absolutely. Christian Barnard was probably one of South Africa's most famous physicians. He did the first ever heart transplant. And even he stated late in his career that death is good medicine because it can achieve what medical advances and technology cannot achieve and stop the suffering of the patient. Not everybody lives to a ripe old age. And I can tell you, visiting my mother's grave, walking around her grave, I was struck by how many people didn't even make it to age 60. Here are some examples. On the left, you have Nick Cordero, a Canadian actor, died of COVID at 41. John Caney, another Canadian actor, died at 43 of a massive heart attack from obesity. Amy Winehouse at the bottom, age 27, died of an overdose. Gilda Radner, great Jewish actress from Saturday Night Live, died at age 42, ovarian cancer. And to the right, some of you will recognize.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry?
You're in it right now.
Continue. Okay.
Yes.
And on the right, we have one of the original comedians of stand-up comedy, Lenny Bruce, who died at age 40 of an overdose. He too was Jewish. In a survey done of physicians nationwide, 80% of physicians claimed they wanted to be at home at end of life, surrounded by family and friends. Yet, we as physicians have this horrible double standard because many of our patients at end of life end up and die in the ICU, receiving aggressive, heroic, yet futile care that does little but prolong the inevitable and prolong needless suffering. This is a book by a woman named Roya Allen about coping with the loss of your pet. And she describes the things we look at when our pets are end of life: lack of mobility, not eating, not breathing right, appear to doing discomfort, becoming incontinent, less mental capacity, not happy, not responding to treatment. And we make a decision. And I submit to you, we need to think about our loved ones in a similar way. This is not something, I'm not talking here about euthanasia in humans. I'm just submitting to you that this is maybe a good way to think about it. I can give you many real life examples, and I'm not going to do this in the interest of time, about many people who have regretted pushing for aggressive care in their loved ones. Many patients are given the option of ongoing aggressive care, and on the left side you see a gentleman on dialysis. On the right side you see Barbara Bush. Many people would choose B. Now, I'm not again saying that dialysis is bad, and we're just going to talk about that we should be more selective about who should be on dialysis and continue with it. Quick definition of dignity. What is dignity? It's a state of quality, a state or quality of being worthy of honor and respect. And I see it closely related to quality of life. Of course, quality of life and dignity mean different things to different people. How important is dignity? Another survey was done of physicians, and this question was posed. What single changing event to you would indicate a serious compromise in your dignity? The answer? The inability to wipe yourself after a bowel movement. Think about that. This can be a game changer in decision making. Sadly, so many life-limiting diseases strip us of our dignity. You know them all: Alzheimer's, dementia, metastatic cancer, end-stage congestive heart failure, end-stage emphysema, end-stage liver disease and cirrhosis, people with multiple diabetic complications, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, other neurological degenerative disorders such as Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and advanced frailty. Frailty is one of those things, when you see it, you know it. It's a condition of being weak and delicate. It's a clinically recognized state of increased vulnerability with a decline in reserve and function along multiple physiological levels, often with significant muscle wasting and loss, usually irreversible, and usually suggests a less than favorable prognosis. Well, talking about end of life seems somewhat counterintuitive for an ER doctor like myself. Counterintuitive meaning contrary to common sense expectation, because as an ER doctor, we love the following. We love an adrenaline rush. We love resuscitating and stabilizing. We love intubating, putting in chest tubes, central lines. We love being diagnostic sleuths. We love saving lives. But we hate and loathe a full waiting room. We want the patients back in rooms being treated. We loathe unsuccessful resuscitations. We loathe being unable to fix a patient. We loathe not making a diagnosis. And we loathe giving up and losing a patient. We reluctantly accept the nature of so many things in our society. Society's ills, unemployment, depression, domestic violence, homelessness, and drug abuse. However, we take comfort and pride in being the safety net of the medical world since we see patients who struggle with these issues. And we see everybody, we never turn a patient away. So how to develop a passionate interest for end-of-life palliative and hospice care? In addition to my mother's journey, the face of emergency medicine has changed over the last 30 years or so. The diabetes and obesity epidemic, by the way, America's quite a bit worse than Canada, but Canada's not great either, have drastically affected the type of patients we see in the ER. Patients have become sicker, disease process is more complex. We have an aging population and multiple patients with comorbidities, meaning they have more than one thing wrong with them, sometimes as much 5, 6, 7, or 8 things. We've seen the unintended consequences of medical science to prolong life. And too much is being done for too many patients with poor quality of life, and I emphasize that, for too long. The loss of human dignity and worsening of quality of life becomes evident and obvious. And I began to realize that much of what we're doing is kind of morally wrong, inhumane, unkind, and may not even be good medical care. I'm going to say a quick word about healthcare versus disease management. Healthcare really implies preventative medicine. having your blood pressure and cholesterol under control, cancer screening. Disease management, that's when things have gone wrong. Dialysis for kidney failure, coronary artery bypass, stroke management. Healthcare is relatively low maintenance, low cost, and high yield. Disease management, the opposite. High maintenance, high cost, much reduced yield. Often like closing the barn after the horse has bolted. I refer to now as a revolving door of the ER. We see in the ER on a daily basis patients who are technically end of life, who really don't belong in the ER and instead should be on hospice or palliative care, where they can be served and treated in a more appropriate and dignified way. They keep coming in, they go home, they come back, they go home. And there are numerous real-life examples in my book that illustrate this and will make you understand the impact of the problem. I'm going to give you an example of 3 in a 2-hour period. This is commonplace on a daily basis, pretty much in any ER in North America. This is a woman who comes in with multiple complaints. She's 70. She doesn't look well. She looks more like 90. She has had previous pulmonary embolism. She's got bad circulation. She's had breast cancer, diabetes, emphysema, kidney stones, an aortic aneurysm, severe arthritis, anxiety, depression, coronary artery disease, and she lives alone. A 60-year-old man, retired military, morbidly obese, fell on his side, hurt his ribcage. He takes blood thinners for atrial fibrillation. He's prone to bleeding. He feels like he broke a few ribs, which turns out was the case. He has multiple other medical conditions. He's had a previous stroke. He's weak on the left side. He's had a pacemaker defibrillator placed. He's had stents put in. He's got poor heart muscle, anxiety, depression, severe arthritis, sleep apnea, and he's on dialysis. And now he's even more miserable because he has broken ribs. This is a widowed man, 92, was discharged from the hospital 2 days ago with pneumonia, congestive heart failure, brought in by his family because he fell. Fortunately, no serious injuries. However, he had memory loss, COPD. He too has atrial fibrillation. He's got prostate issues, accompanied by his family, who didn't feel they could accurately take care of him and wanted to place him in a SNP, which stands for skilled nursing facility. The patient himself refused and wanted to go home and live independently. Many of you may have dealt with this in your own lives with loved ones who are elderly. And we see these kind of patients every day in the emergency department. These patients were quite rare 30 years ago. Now they become the norm. We don't really cure them, we band-aid them. Occasionally, some have a treatable or reversible problem that can be cured with surgery, like a gallbladder problem or a quick inpatient admission. I can tell you, I never cease to be amazed when I ask a 300-pound patient in the ER who comes in with an ankle sprain, hey, do you have any other medical problems? And they respond, nope, I'm in great health. Well, sir, you really aren't, unless you're 7'4". Briefly, something I want to talk about, and that I call the crystal ball epiphany that I refer to in my book. One day when I was visiting my mother a few months before she died, she was already in a memory care facility. Her Alzheimer's was already very advanced. She no longer spoke to me. She no longer recognized me. She just sat in a chair, stared into space, was incontinent, had to be fed. And I had this epiphany. I looked at her and said, well, I didn't. I thought to myself, what if 6 years ago, prior to the dementia setting in, I looked at her when she was still fully functional, vibrant, and wonderful. And I said, Mom, look into this crystal ball. This is you 6 years from now. What would she have said? I can tell you what she would have said. She would have said, no, oh, no, no, no. If that happens, push me over a cliff. The last thing I recall my mother saying right before her insight disappeared, and I will never ever forget this, she knew something wasn't right. She knew when I was taking care of her, and she said these words, Alan, I'm so sorry. That I've become a burden to you. There are certainly situations where family and loved ones consider it a mitzvah, an honor, a privilege, and a duty to care for an aging parent or loved one, and they don't consider it a burden. This is wonderful. This is praiseworthy. This is a huge mitzvah. A brief word about the professional patient. This is when your life and your job is that of being a full-time patient. I can tell you, I, for one, would never want that because I would never want to be a burden on my family. How about you? Think about it. A quick word about the baby boomers, of which I'm one. We need a reality check, certainly here in America. The numbers are rising. Healthcare for us 10 years from now is going to be a daunting task. It's also been shown that with Medicare here in America, that an incredible amount, 28 to 30% of the Medicare dollars are spent in the last few months of life. Many of us are unhealthy and let ourselves go. We are part of the diabetes and obesity epidemic. And we want everything done. We feel like we deserve it. But do we really deserve everything after all these years of self-destructive and unhealthy habits? Many healthcare experts in America note that we are probably going over the fiscal cliff at this rate due to an unsustainable healthcare system. What are we leaving behind? A bankrupt system? Is that fair to the next generations? We need to get close to reality. We owe it to the next generation to leave the world sustainable, including pollution control, climate change, ecology, and a sustainable healthcare system. Time to debunk some myths. This is the boogeyman. Doctors are gods. No, we're not. We are human and mortal like everybody else, and as hard as we try, we cannot reverse the aging process. There goes Bookfoot. Doctors can cure everything. Well, yeah, we can cure bladder infections, strep throat, we can even cure TB, some cancers detected early, but there are so many diseases we cannot cure. Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig, stage 4 cancer. What we mostly do is disease management that I referred to earlier. We cannot cure kidney failure. We have dialysis. Cannot cure coronary disease. We've got stents and bypass. Cannot cure strokes. We've got clot busters. Cannot cure asthma. We've got inhalers. Cannot cure diabetes. We've got insulin and metformin. We cannot cure mental illness, but we have Prozac and we have counseling. There's the tooth fairy, another myth to debunk. The doctors save lives all the time. Well, yeah, in Hollywood, in shows like ER, Chicago Hope, St. Elsewhere, and Grey's Anatomy, yep, we occasionally save lives. Occasional stab wound survivors, bad car accidents, patient need pacemakers, some overdoses, intentional overdoses, obstetrical complications, and certain patients with pneumonia. There goes the monster. One more myth, that transplants are a cure. Well, while liver and kidney transplants do add an incredible lease on life and make a lot of difference to a lot of people, this is not like treating a hangnail. These patients are immunosuppressed and organ rejections can happen. Here's another myth to debunk, that hospice and palliative care are equivalent to death panels. No, they're not. We are not giving up on the patient. This is compassionate care for patients and families who are suffering. Here's another myth, that having the conversation about end of life, having the conversation about advance directives, making your wishes known, talking about it, will traumatize or scar you for life. Nothing could be further from the truth. You will find this very opposite to be true. And I too consider having this conversation with your family a mitzvah. You're going to make their life easier. Palliative care is not about pulling the plug. It's not about euthanasia. It's not about death panels. What it is compassionate care for patients and families who are suffering with an emphasis on symptom management, meaning helping the pain, helping the nausea, helping the anxiety. That's wonderful. Isn't that great? It's a team approach and addresses goals of care. What do you want? What are your wishes? We want to respect your wishes. It's specialized medical care for people with serious life-limiting illnesses. It addresses the physical, intellectual, emotional, social, and spiritual needs of the patient and family. It's appropriate at any age and any stage of illness, even for kids who have pediatric cancers. And it could sometimes be provided with curative treatment. For example, Hodgkin's, where you're hoping for a cure, but you can still get the additional symptom management that you need. A very high percentage of palliative care transition into hospice care. The Vancouver Hospice Society is, I believe, quite well known. This is the paid medical benefits for patients with a poor prognosis, usually less than 6 months. The indications for going on hospice care is similar, but in the late stages. The biggest complaint I've heard from hospice nurses is, gee, I wish you'd referred the patient and family to us sooner. We could have made them more comfortable a lot sooner. And that is so very true. And all it takes is a call to hospice, either by yourself, by your doctor, or by a social worker. The Canadian Hospice and Palliative Care Association, very active and big in Canada. Brief word about medical aid in dying. I had a brief discussion the other day with Dr. Infeld when we met for a few minutes. He's very well versed in this topic. Not legal in many states in America, but legal in Canada. The only states where it's legal in America are the states that are Democrat states. So other states are working on getting this passed. It's a totally separate discussion. It can be controversial in many people's eyes. And we're going to just briefly touch on it. 1,300 in Canada, more than 1,300 reported medical assisted deaths in Canada, where cancer is the most common, followed by respiratory, neurological, and cardiovascular conditions. And many of these people did receive palliative care. I will add that dementia and mental illness does not qualify. Now, this may sound counterintuitive, but I'm not a maverick, I'm not a rogue, I'm not a renegade, I'm not a dirty, rotten scoundrel, and I'm not a crook. I have the backing of the American College of Emergency Physicians, the American Medical Association, and the Canadian Medical Association. Data proven benefits of hospice and palliative care, improving symptoms, better quality of life, better length of life, family satisfaction, better bereavement outcomes, less PTSD. The care is matched to patient-centered goals, cost avoidance, maintenance of dignity, and a dignified death. I look at the slide and I always think, this is so wonderful what this is available. And many people ultimately become sick and tired of being sick and tired. And many welcome the care, the opportunity to have a conversation about the goals of care. So how about a conversation? If your doctor doesn't have a conversation, be your advocate, be proactive, set up an appointment to talk about your or your loved one's prognosis and treatment options. Become knowledge and educated about invasive treatments, such as being on a ventilator, being on dialysis, getting a transplant, being oxygen dependent on life. You can go to YouTube. There's tons of information that will educate and enlighten you. Do your diligence, do your due diligence. You'll be glad you did. Talk to your family. Talk to your doctor. Talk to your attorney. Talk to Rabbi Jonathan Enfeld. Having the conversation may be awkward and uncomfortable, but I can guarantee you, in the end, you'll be really glad you did. These are some resources that are available. There are many more. I like the Conversation Project a lot. That's based out of Boston. There's Compassionate Choices, which is based out of Denver. And there's one called Thoughtful Life Conversations here in Arizona that can educate people on end-of-life issues, including advanced directives, et cetera, et cetera. This is I got this from the British Columbia website about advanced directives. You can look it up yourself and what the form looks like, the medical power of attorney. You can access this easily. So to make end-of-life and palliative hospice care more commonplace and less taboo, which it is for some people, We need a culture change, both in the medical world, that's us, and the real world out there. But a culture change requires enlightenment, education, willingness to accept and embrace end of life, and understanding that dignified end of life can be excellent and compassionate care. Also, accepting that offering family and patients palliative end of life care doesn't mean we're giving up. It means that we're looking at an excellent option. The concept of dignified death is foreign to physicians. As I mentioned, we see losing a patient as a failure and death as the enemy. And here, we as physicians are part of the problem. Here in Arizona, 2 palliative care doctors, at least just I know of, were fired from their jobs because other specialists, especially oncologists, complained that these palliative care doctors were interfering with the care of the patients. This is an overheard conversation in the ICU between a kidney specialist, a nephrologist, and an ICU nurse. Nephrologist, her kidney function has declined. We need to start her on dialysis. The ICU nurse, but doctor, she's 103 years old. Nephrologist, but she's a good 103. This is the response of the ICU nurse. Are you serious? You've got to be kidding. You see, some doctors are hammers, and certain patients and diseases are like a nail. It's a hammer seeing everything as a nail. And this actually does exist in medicine more than you realize. Much of what we're talking about has to do, I'm going to talk a little about saying goodbye. It's hard, but I can tell you for sure that saying goodbye can be the ultimate act of love. These pictures tell the story. I also encourage you to embrace spirituality. I can tell you without a doubt, I've seen this over and over again. Those who are connected to a higher power do so much better than those who are disconnected when it comes to end of life. I encourage this. Some rights to the dying, the right to participate in decisions, the right to expect continuing medical care, even though we just go to comfort care, the right to be free of pain and other symptoms, the right of children to participate, the right to understand the process, and the right to die in peace and with dignity. Primary care physicians have historically done a poor job at having end-of-life conversations with patients and family, even though here in America, Medicare does actually pays for that visit. As a result, we as ER doctors are often required to have this conversation with patients and family in a less than ideal, often crisis situation. Often with patients who are obviously near death, comatose or semi-comatose. This is an example of a 94-year-old woman brought in from a nursing home. This is a real life case with dementia, with pneumonia. She's unresponsive. She clearly is at death's door with no advance directives. And we got the 2 daughters with her. One daughter says, do everything. We cannot lose my mother. And I explain, well, if she's doing so badly, we may have to put her on a ventilator. And the other daughter sort of under her breath says, well, she did once tell me she never wanted to be on a respirator. And we have to deal with this conflict. You'll be astounded how often this happens. We were able to resolve this because the daughter who noted that she didn't want to be on a respirator turned out to be the power of attorney. And we were able to give her comfort care, and it ended up peaceful and dignified. Most physicians are uncomfortable, poorly trained. Now it's getting better. Medical schools are now training medical students to have a conversation. Medical community is guilty of giving patients and their family false hope. And I find this intellectually dishonest and unacceptable. But there is good news. There's ample opportunity for us to do this better and to have become more educated in having the conversation. Conflict management can be addressed. More good news, over 100 ER doctors now in America have completed a fellowship in palliative care, and the numbers are growing. The tide is, thank God, beginning to turn. Many hospitals have vibrant palliative care programs with family conferences, and I'm sure there are those in Vancouver that have this as well. These are helpful catchphrases used to teach doctors how to have a conversation. It seems that you or your mom or your dad are having a hard time and are suffering. Do you have a good understanding of what's going on? Would you like to talk about it? What are your wishes? What are his or her wishes? If you had your choice, you'd prefer to go home or stay in the hospital. Would you like more help to relieve your symptoms? And even if the initial conversation regarding advanced directives and comfort care is rejected or doesn't go well, you have planted the seed. And very often the family comes back and say, you know, Dad isn't doing well, he's deteriorating. I'd like to talk about palliative care or hospice care. So you've planted an important seed. What does a good death mean to me? Autonomy for as long as possible, death on my own terms. This is so important, folks. Making peace, apologize, asking for forgiveness, mending fractured relationships. Do it, do it. And not being a burden of my loved ones that I've mentioned before. And being grateful for the incredible life I've had. What does it mean to you? Quick word about the COVID-19 pandemic. We're almost at the end. It came out of nowhere. It caught us off guard and with our pants down. It created an unforeseen, unimaginable, unthinkable trail of devastation. Hundreds of thousands of people who entered 2021 had no idea that it would be their last year on Earth. I was helping out the intensivists in the ICU, and this is what I observed. Numerous patients who were on ventilators would likely have declined the futile care had they had the advanced directives and had the conversation about their wishes. This has created an enormous, unprecedented burden for the need of ICU beds and ventilators. You guys see this in the news. But I saw this firsthand, utterly exhausted, fatigued, burned out doctors and nurses who are having trouble even staying afloat. And death crept up unexpectedly. To me, it is probably the most sobering reminder I've ever witnessed of the need to have the conversation, talk about advanced directives, talk about your wishes. This is a copy of the book that Dr. Shapiro and I co-authored. It's available on Amazon. Dr. Shapiro also has his own website to counsel people. It's called livesaremeaningful.com. I invite you to check it out. It's well done. Go Canucks. We're close to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. To all of you, a good and sweet New Year, Shana Tova, Umatakah. May you all be inscribed in the book of life. Thank you so much for your time. Any one of you want to contact me or keep in touch with me for any reason, questions, friendships, whatever, my phone number is here and my email address is there. Thank you so much again for your time. Let me turn it over to Rabbi Infeld. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here.
So first of all, thank you, Dr. Molk. That was an excellent presentation. I see one question. I want to ask if anyone else has any other questions. It's an excellent question. I want to just say a few things before we go to the questions. Firstly, when you were talking about dignity, it actually reminded me. It reminded me about the concept of kavod. Really, the Hebrew for dignity or the word honor is kavod. And the shoresh of the word kavod, the root letter is kaved, is actually the same shorosh that it literally means heavy. And so what we're talking about is treating someone in a heavy way, meaning intellectually, emotionally, treating them with weight and taking the situation very seriously. And so when you're treating someone with dignity, it's heavy on your heart, it's heavy on your mind, and everything that you do is actually very, very important. The other question, or the other thing I wanted to say, is that I actually, when you said something about relationships, I actually personally often deal with relationships. And I remember when I took a chaplaincy internship in New Jersey, my mentor, who was a Methodist minister, she explained that, I'm going to close my window for a second. That's our next door neighbor's dog. Everyone thinks I have a dog during COVID-19. I don't, but all my neighbors do. So she explained that when there's an injury of relationship and it's never healed, that injured relationship actually continues beyond the death of one or two parties, or both, in that relationship. And so speaking of healing that relationship is a very important one. And finally, the other thing that I wanted to mention is you appropriately said that I'm able to help with some of the, if you have questions regarding any of these things. You sort of missed the picture. I don't have a beard, but you were right. I actually often am involved in questions about when to begin palliative care, and have often been called into these team meetings with the doctor and the family members. And I wouldn't say I'm happy to do it, but it is something that I'm actually honored to do. And so I deeply appreciate when people give me the kavod, the respect, to be asked to be part of that decision-making process. That I find it to be a kavod, a heavy thing to do, but take it in that way. And certainly you should know, and your family should know, that I'm here for you in those situations. And so we have a question: is it possibly a slippery slope situation if we say to decline the quality of life is not worth living? So I guess the question is what point would we say that there, we all decline? It's the nature of humanity. It's I like to tell the story of when I was once being checked I have a congenital heart defect, and I went in for my yearly appointment, and the doctor said to me, "Oh, your particular defect would be very interesting for the second-year students to listen to." So the first thing the second-year medical student asked me is, "What's your prognosis?" And I said, and I immediately wasn't expecting the question, but I immediately responded by saying, 100% absolute certain mortality. So we all know that there is a point, as you said, in which we will pass away. But what really is the point in, how do we know that there is a point of, in which someone is so far along in terms of that decline that it's time to begin palliative care? I think your cousin Bob wanted to respond to my question as well.
Unmute yourself. Unmute. Let me leave him a written note so he can see it.
Yeah, Bob, you're on mute, so we can't hear you.
Let me write him a note here. He's really well suited to answer this, by the way.
But he doesn't hear us on mute.
Okay, sorry. No, I
And by the
think
way,
Alan's presentation is excellent. I think the focus that both he and I have is the focus is on the individual. It's not for the daughter or the son or anybody else to decide. It really ultimately, hopefully, is for the patient. So when you decide at what point your life has no more quality, it's a really an individual decision. If you look at kids that have been spinal cord injured, most of them are young, athletic young men. And there's a high incidence of suicide, or at least suicide attempts in these individuals, most of whom are not successful and go on to live successful lives. So I don't think you can give an absolute answer.
by the way, Bob, where are you?
I'm in Laguna Woods,
Excellent. Thank you.
South Orange
Thank
County,
you.
Los Angeles area.
Thank you. It's hard to know on Zoom. Dr. Molk, did you have an answer to that as well, or?
I think, Bob covered that pretty well, but it's, it's very much an individual decision. And, hopefully that individual still has capacity, still has good, reasonable insight in their own decision-making about what they want and don't want. And that's why, but it's also important that if some people become disabled either through dementia or through stroke, to have a medical power of attorney who will respect your wishes and speak for you. The decision often it's complex. It's medical. There's a little medical component. There's an ethical component. There's a religious component. Sometimes there's a legal component when it's a slippery slope. The best thing to do is to be proactive as much as possible. And I truly see it as a mitzvah. I've heard many people say, my dad made his wishes known. He got all his affairs in order. And when he passed away, things were so much easier than we expected, rather than leaving behind a situation of chaos and confusion. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I think that that's very important, is to actually have one's affairs in order, long in anticipation of something that can happen, so that everyone knows, or so that your family knows what your wishes are. And it's important to understand in this kaved issue that I'm talking about, is no two human beings are alike. No two human being situations are ever alike. And not only do we live this life in a very different way, but I think we all die in a very different way, and we all become ill in very different ways. And so I think that none of the answers are actually objective. Usually, they're often subjective. Why it is important to have a team of people who love you, helping to make some of those decisions based on your requests beforehand. So if you can lay out what you think, any guidance you can give beforehand is important. And we never know if someone's going to suddenly pass away, suddenly have a stroke, or is going to, in fact, and we'll get. I see your hand up, Bob. The rabbis actually debate whether or not it's better to pass away suddenly with no illness, or after an elongated illness. And they actually come down on the side of, we would often think suddenly, but the rabbis come down after elongated illness, so that you're able to share words and repair relationships.
I just wanted to say that I know Alan will back me up on this. There have been many cases where I've felt strongly that the patient should not be placed on a ventilator, but they decide to do it anyway. And I have to dissimulate. It's not, I consider it not my choice. Even as strongly as I feel about it, it's not my choice.
So I want to thank Diane once again for helping to put this all together. And I want to thank Dr. Shapiro for helping as well, and Dr. Molk for his excellent presentation. It's hard to believe, but we're already near the end. We are, unless Dan has any I don't think we have any more prime times planned for the moment, because I don't know if anyone's heard, but the high holidays are coming around the corner. And so we sort of anticipate that people may not want to join in any prime times in the next few weeks. And so I don't think we have anything planned. Am I right, Diane?
We don't. We have Shabbat
So-
with a
so
difference
hold
on
on.
Friday night and Slichot on Saturday night.
Please do join us for Shabbat with a Difference on Friday night, and Slichot then on Saturday night. Slichot will be actually talking about can one move on? Can one move on without forgiving someone who has done some grave injury to you?
Rabbi, can I just say something?
Many pieces. Yes, Gaynor, please.
So just one thing that you obviously wouldn't mention, but on Sunday morning, the BI Good Times Club committee, we're having a walking tour of Jewish Strathcona. And for those who live in Vancouver, and one of our members, Daniela Givoni, is actually going to be leading the tour. It's going to be a 2-hour walking tour starting at 700 East Pender in Strathcona. And it's $10 to register or to come along. And the money goes to the Jewish Museum and Archives. So if you do want to come, just come along to 700 East Pender on Sunday morning. It should be great.
And I believe that Sunday is supposed to be 22 and sunny.
That's why we're going.
What?
That's why we're going on Sunday.
I forget you guys are
Sunday's
centigrade. We stole Fahrenheit here. That was funny. My mistake when I said it was 72 degrees there. But
not a problem. We understand. So I do want to thank you once again, and thank you, Gaynor. And just let's, if you can, maybe just tell us one line. I love to start with Torah and end with Torah. If you wouldn't mind just sharing with us what for you as an ER doctor, or in your profession, what has been, if you can remember, the most meaningful experience you've had in your job? And I know that you are nearing retirement, but let's end on, the Talmud says that if you depart with words of Torah, you will remember the name of the other person. So maybe if we can depart with this message, this small story of a most meaningful experience.
Sure. I thank you for giving me that opportunity. The one that comes to mind is I had a patient, young woman, age 30, brought into the ER by her father, who was a professor at ASU, and the concern was that she was having suicidal ideation, that she became extremely depressed. She was in the room with her dad. I was in there with her. I looked at her and I said, I'm so sorry. Introduced myself that you were going through such a horrible time. Would you like to talk about it? You can feel safe and I will just listen. And she said, thank you. She said, my fiance broke up with me. We were going to get married in 3 months. And I said something to him that was actually unforgivable. He got so upset and angry. He's left town, and I know he's not coming back. And I'm heartbroken. I don't feel like I have any reason to live. I don't know what to do. And I looked at her, I said, I have to ask you this question. I'm so sorry to hear this. Do you actually think you might harm yourself? Are you considering self-harm or ending your life? And she said to me, yes, I have, but I wouldn't do it because of him, as she pointed at her father in the room. I would never do that to him. And I began to cry. The doctor began to cry. The patient looked at me and said, hey, doc, you look like you could use a hug. She came up to me and hugged and comforted me. And I was just amazed at the human spirit, at the resilience of people, at the kindness of people, at the resolve not to leave behind a trail of devastation and the willingness to get help. So I hope that's a story that you find meaningful before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Thank you for the opportunity, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. We really appreciate your joining us. And I can see that everyone really enjoyed this evening and appreciated your words. So thank you. Feel free, everyone, to say hello. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Oh, hello. Shana
Hello,
Tova.
thank you very much,
Hello.
Rabbi. Thank you very much, Dr. Walk.
Thank you.
you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. So interesting and helpful.
Done?
Thank you, Diane. Have a wonderful night, everyone.
Thank you, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.